We are delighted to welcome Ed Fidoe, CEO of the London Interdisciplinary School, to our 5th episode of Heads and Tails. Ed, we have long admired your work, so it's a real honour to have you on the podcast. Now, Ed holds a rare achievement of having started both a school, that's School 21 in Stratford, and a university, the London Interdisciplinary School in Whitechapel. And we're going to dig deep into the genesis and ambitions of both today. But Ed, firstly, thank you for joining us on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks, Walter. It's great to be here.
Nice to have you. Now, much like your interdisciplinary sessions, I'm sure, I'd like to start wide in the discussion, and then we can draw much more narrow into the minutiae following. By anyone's standards, you have what I would call an enviable career, but for those in education, particularly us, even more so. What's behind that sense of agency, particularly in the context perhaps of your own schooling and childhood?
Great question. I mean, I think I'm probably lucky in that I'm not particularly susceptible to imposter syndrome. I mean, I obviously should have felt like an imposter in all the things I've been genuinely in the last 10, 12 years, because I mean, I feel like less of an imposter in the university space, actually, weirdly, even though I don't even have a master's degree, than I did in the school sector, because I wasn't a qualified teacher. I think that is where I really did start to feel like a bit of an imposter. But I think the sort of the fact that I could bluff my way past that was probably helpful in terms of giving me a sense of agency. The reason I wanted to get involved in the education sector is influenced in both good and bad ways by my own education. And I went to a tiny independent fee-paying school in the East Midlands, which was completely new. So the primary school of it, I was in the first year group of the primary school part of it. It was run by a 26-year-old ex-basketball player, and it was kind of, there's 30 people in the entire school. And then I was there for 14 years, and it was sort of both wonderful in many, many ways, a magical place, and very focused on academics. It was very good at getting good academic results, but it felt quite narrow in its approach to me. And particularly I was doing other stuff outside of school, which I was learning lots from in terms of doing acting. And I thought, I think, perhaps other people's horizons could have been broadened a bit more as well. And I wonder what a school would look like that was trying to instill in people a sense of the possible, a little bit more than just, you've got to get some great grades and then you're off to the races.
Instilling the sense of the possible. An early plug for Oppidum is much the narrative that our mentors follow. Can I ask you, did you have a mentor growing up? Do you have a mentor now?
Yeah, I don't have a formal mentor, but I do have mentors, and I've sort of it's interesting. Sometimes someone you've worked closely with, so I would consider there's a blurry line, particularly as you get older, I think, between friendship and mentors. But Peter, who I co-founded School 21 with, now that I no longer work closely with him or really with him informally at all, he's a mentor for me, and actually, really good board members are mentors in a way, as long as they can still retain their objectivity. But another one I sort of co-found is Andrew Mullinger is a mentor, and for me now, a mentor is somebody who I can phone up, who kind of provides two things. One is they provide a point of view that's somewhat independent, and they're not kind of emotionally involved in the outcome, and that's helpful. And the second thing is I'm increasingly interested in left field positions, and unusual points of view, which both Peter and Andrew are both very, very good at. And you might dismiss 50% of what they say because it's kind of a bit too wacky, but just having somebody say something unexpected, giving a new point of view, is really, really helpful for me.
That's Peter Hyman, another legend in the education field. Is Andrew the man who then wrote Oscar scripts? Is that right?
No, Andrew Mullinger is one of the founders of something called Funding Circle. He is an imposter in the education sector. No, I'm joking, but he's he was sort of set that up age in his late 20s with two friends from university. One of the UK's first unicorns. They IPO'd a couple of years ago. He's been involved with School 21 as a governor. He's just stepped down, and also LAS. He's been on the board since the beginning.
Wonderful. You had a stint, I know, at McKinsey in the run up to the coalition government, and before that, you were on the stage for a bit, and it's an important segue because personally, I am party to a successful link between the stage and the classroom. How did that prepare you for a career in education, if at all?
I think being involved with television as a kid was a huge thing because it demystified the sort of impossibility. It sort of demystified TV, right? And therefore also many other things. Because as a 12-year-old, rather than sitting on my sofa and looking at the box in the corner and thinking that all these people were sort of magic and it was completely unattainable to be involved with something like that, I would be in Nottingham filming with a bunch of kind of, often quite overweight blokes, and then, sort of a mixture of different people who were sort of all different backgrounds, and they were you did just sort of some wires and some cameras, and there was nothing magic about it at all. It was just hard work and collaboration and some good leadership. But you could sort of see how they were putting it all together, and that was quite inspiring in a way, because you suddenly thought, well, maybe that's how other seemingly magical things happen too. And this is part of me, the sort of trying to help people understand what's possible, is that the path to get there is not. It's like when you say, oh, I want to start a school. And people go, well, that's kind of like learning how to fly. I don't think anyone thinks that anymore. But in 2011, people were like, you can't start a school. That's impossible. But then you actually say back to people, what do you think it takes to start a school? And they say, well, yeah, I guess you have to find a site and you have to find some teachers and convince parents to go there. And you're like, yeah, that's what I'm going to go and do. And it's all, each of those things is quite hard, but they're not impossible in the individual, and collectively it all feels impossible. And being part of theatre, I think, helps you understand what it takes to take something from the page to reality quite quickly, actually. And you are convincing people to come, you're creating something of value, you're working together in a collaborative way towards a kind of big deadline, which for us at the school and university was opening. Well, those dates are seared on my memory forever, those 2 dates. And there's something very exciting about it, and it is a bit of a show. And I think as well, the other thing you have to do when I was involved in theatre is you have to kind of convince people you've got the money, convince people you've got the theatre, and convince the theatre you've got the actors, and it all kind of dances around a bit. And being an entrepreneur in education or any field, you have to do plenty of that too. So for me, that helped with that. And there's, of course, this other big part of it, which is that speaking skills and oracy was a really important thing for us at School 21. And that comes, for me, that the part of which I was passionate about, that comes directly from the theatre stuff.
And on oracy, Voice 21 is an initiative that came out of School 21. We're jumping ahead a bit, but I know oracy is a huge part of what you do.
Yeah, that came out of School 21, and we thought we launched with it. It was Peter's idea to kind of put speaking skills at the centre of School 21, and then we had 2 or 3 teachers, a guy called Daniel and Jeffrey, who were completely brilliant, who designed the oracy curriculum. And then we decided, it should go to more schools than just School 21. So we founded this charity called Voice 21, which is then led by Becky Earnshaw, who's led it for the last 7 or 8 years and grown it into, works with nearly 1,000 schools in the country now. So it's been going great guns.
So you mentioned reality, turning an idea into reality. 2011 or 10, you leave your job at McKinsey. Michael Gove launches the free school agenda, and there you go. There's an opportunity to do something pretty innovative. You've answered this question hundreds of times, but in a nutshell, could you explain? I want to know the genesis of it, and I want an anecdote on some of the difficulties in actually launching on that day, Sid, in your mind.
Okay. Yeah. So the day was 10th September 2012, and it was the day after the Paralympics had just finished. So it was a kind of magical time to be in Stratford. I mean, if you rewind though, it wasn't necessarily always going to be in Stratford. The genesis of it is, I'd been to this tiny school. I thought starting a school, which I'd seen happen. I'd been at a school that had been started. So for me, that was already demystified as a thing. I could see that you did it. I could see that you could do it. And I also had a view about what it could potentially be, or certainly I didn't want it to be. I was at McKinsey. Free schools, if you want to start a school, the free school policy is a gift. So I thought it might not last very long. So I quit my job pretty much as soon as the coalition government agreed to keep free schools in the policy. And then I got introduced to Peter quite quickly by a guy called Michael Barber, who was working at McKinsey at the time. He'd worked in Number 10 with Peter, and later on he became the chair of the main universities regulator, which was also helpful, by the way. But he introduced me to Peter, which is the best introduction I've ever had, bar none. And suddenly, and Peter was the only person I met who was really interested in innovation as well as education of disadvantage. There was a big movement around that time that still exists, which is a really important movement, led by Teach First, but also other chains of schools like ARC and Harris and so on, around tackling educational disadvantage. But Peter and I both wanted to try and reimagine what education was at all, was, you know, sort of start from scratch, if you like. And that was really exciting. And in meeting Peter, who'd been a teacher for 10 years after leaving Number 10, you suddenly had a much clearer vision of what that could look like. And I'd sort of achieved the first thing that I set out to do, which was to find a head teacher. Number 2 was find a site. So that was still difficult, but then we found this empty school in Stratford. And I mean, some of the kind of stories, there's thousands of stories. I mean, one was that we had to convince parents to go to a school that didn't exist. Not only that, we couldn't actually tell them where it was physically. So a year before your child starts in secondary school, you have to sort of nominate the school in the local area that you want it to go, you want this child to go to. And we were having to get them to put School 21 as their number 1 choice in the borough. And we couldn't tell them the address of the school because we hadn't secured the site. And we had no teachers that we could introduce them to. It was just me, Peter, and Ollie, like 3 dodgy second-hand car salesmen. You know, and so to do that, I had to stand outside a lot of primary schools trying to convince parents to send their sort of child to School 21 for the secondary part. But it was an all through school, so I also spent a fair bit of time hanging around nurseries. So this is all stuff that's like sort of borderline dodgy, but I you know, you have to do it to kind of talk to the parents, because otherwise you can't get to the parents where they're at. And we also I remember put banners up on the railings outside the local park, which was illegal, and we did it 2 years in a row. And the second time we did it, yeah, I got dressed down by the police who came to visit, and I kind of had to take the hit because Peter was the head teacher, so we felt that we couldn't have him being dressed down. But yeah, no, so there's all sorts. There's many stories beside. But yeah, it was nice. Great. It was a great adventure.
Not all glamour at the top, Ed.
Not at all. No. Handing out thousands of flyers. I mean, thousands in council estates. I mean, it's a big deal.
For young people watching, that's what a bit of hustle does. I want to just ask one perhaps technical question on the pedagogy behind it, and then we can kick on to your current project. Broadly, battlegrounds are drawn between perhaps knowledge and skills, and School 21 is what I would call a progressive education school. You do assemblies in the round, your set plays focus on oracy, it's a lot of group work. The other end of the spectrum is around knowledge, more didactic teaching. There is a growing, I know, narrative around behavior. How do you see that sort of duality progressing, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've always found, so someone was asking me about this the other day, and they'd noticed that Daisy Christodoulou was involved in LIS, which is the university, at the beginning. And I got Daisy involved because I think she's fantastic. I think she's a really interesting thinker in education. But of course, Daisy would be characterized in the sort of more traditionalist, knowledge-based school, and I would be characterizing Peter in the sort of progressive, you know, lefty tree-hugging type side of the spectrum. And the reality is we're like 85–90% in complete agreement with Daisy, and vice versa. There are some differences. I think there are people, however, that do exist outside of those on that spectrum. I don't think it's a completely false dichotomy, the sort of traditionalist view and some more progressive views. I mean, my view is that we can't give up on innovation in education. That's preposterous. But there are a bunch of things that have been tried that don't work, that quite a lot of people on the progressive side continue to try and do, or to continue to talk about, that are just not that useful to continue to try and kind of advocate for, because there's been well, one would be, I mean, sort of people have different learning styles as a kind of, or we should just have students that are sort of, their learning should be completely self-led. People have different learning styles, let's say that one. I mean, they broadly don't have significantly different learning styles that are different enough to justify completely different kinds of pedagogy. The pedagogy should be driven by the content that you're teaching. Most people will learn art in a way that involves doing some art. Most people will learn science by, in a completely different way. They don't want to learn science visually just because they're a visual learner. There are good and bad ways of teaching science, and you should start there and then maybe make some adjustments around the edges for people. So I think learning styles driving learning design is not good and has been debunked and we should just move on, but some people really don't want to. And then I think, what was the other thing I said was a bad idea? I mean, there's so many of these.
No, it's wonderful. We could,
yeah,
we could talk for hours.
But I think there's lots. But I think you can't give up on innovation. So we at School 21 were trying things that were new. Sometimes we were dusting off old ideas and trying to do them in a high fidelity way, and that's hard to do. And some of it worked, and some of it didn't work, frankly. And some of it worked beautifully and brilliantly, and some of it didn't work, and we stopped doing it pretty fast. And I think that sometimes people get uncomfortable about that in education, and I understand why, but we are condemning ourselves to mediocrity if we don't try new things.
Amen. I agree. So moving on a few years, you launched the London Interdisciplinary School, which is if I'm right in saying, the newest university since Warwick opened in 1965, or is that right?
The first, yeah, no, the specifics of this are important because people do care, but we're the first new institution to open with our own degree awarding powers since Warwick. And the reason that's important is because in the whole intervening gap, new institutions have opened. We have had new universities, but they've had to be essentially linked up to or monitored by another university for 6 or 7 years, which means you had no innovation. But by having degree awarding powers from the beginning, it meant we didn't have to map our degree against somebody else. So we could create something completely new.
Got it. I've been up to Whitechapel. I've seen it in action. It's an absolute wonderful sight to behold. Can you explain broadly why it's different and how it's different?
Yeah, so this is the sort of thesis here is that our education is still designed like it's a library, and like education exists and it has to be organized in a library. And I'm saying this to somebody who is sitting in front of
it looks like Gryffindor's common room, doesn't it?
It does look a little bit like Gryffindor's common room, but of course, as we all know, education knowledge is now not organized like that. It's networked. It exists literally everywhere, connected on the internet. And that's also how knowledge exists in the world and how we kind of perceive knowledge in the world. And we don't sort of think, right, I'm going to use a bit of biology today or a little bit of anthropology. Independently, we think about these things in kind of just a big complex set of tools that we're going to use to tackle certain kinds of problems. Now, education hasn't moved on from being organized like a library. It's still organized in subjects and disciplines, and this is particularly acute at university, where essentially people have to study one subject for 3 years. So what we're saying is we're going to organize knowledge in a completely different way. We're not going to organize knowledge you learn around one discipline. We're going to organize it around complex problems. And so, but it's still academic. There's still knowledge. It still upsets the traditionalists, but I don't know why, because the level of rigor is exactly the same. We're just organizing the knowledge in a different way. So currently in the term, students are studying. 1 year group are looking at sustainability, another year group have been looking at AI and ethics. So AI and ethics, they'll be learning machine learning. They'll be taught that by a machine learning expert. They'll be being taught philosophy from a philosopher who's joined us from LSE. They will be learning law from a legal expert. And they'll be putting all that together to think about AI and ethics. In sustainability, similarly, they'll be looking at ecology, maybe neuroscience. They'll be looking at economics, all being taught by academics who are experts in those areas.
Got it. So can I ask a question perhaps in current context of education? An interdisciplinary approach to ethics or water pollution or anything is fascinating. I'm going to position it around teacher strikes. How would a cohort at the LIS understand the problems and solutions around that issue?
Well, so first of all, we have to sort of agree that this issue is a complex issue. And for the sake of this, I think we probably can agree that that's a complex issue, the teacher strikes. And what we believe at LIS is that for a complex problem, you need to take multiple perspectives and you need to think in terms of networks and relationships. So multiple perspectives for us is multiple disciplinary perspectives. And so you might say, our students might say, okay, well, let's look at this from a historical perspective. when were the last sets of teacher strikes, for example? They're actually in the 1970s. I happen to know because I remember my parents talking about them, and they felt that that set the teaching profession back. They weren't a fan of them, and they felt that set the teaching profession back sort of 20, 30 years in terms of the status of being a teacher. Now, I think that status has been wholly recovered and then some. And for me now, it's a very high status role. But that's an interesting perspective to take about what was the consequences of those strikes sort of 40, 50 years ago when the last happened. Of course, an economic perspective is interesting, ethical perspective on what you're doing because of the impact it's having on young people. The other thing is then to think about the networks and relationships. Something else that LIS students learn are different methods. They learn quantitative and qualitative methods. One of the methods they learn is systems thinking. I think you'd have to think about this from a kind of systems perspective. This isn't something that's just happening in education. There's also something going on in health and other public services like transport and so on. So what is it about the whole system here? And of course, inflation and all of that context. So you'd be thinking about what's the system? Where are the important feedback loops? What can I do to influence them? And they would be looking at qualitative data and quantitative data. Some of our students did placements this summer where they were looking at huge amounts of data for Crossrail, the Elizabeth line, and they were having to say to the Elizabeth line, we need some qualitative data to go with all this, quantity data you've given to us. We need to do some focus groups to understand what's behind it. So they might say, right, we want data on teacher pay, we want data on numbers of teachers that are striking, but also let's do some focus groups with some teachers as well. So I would hope that the students would sort of organize a project around like that to think through this complex problem.
And what does your typical student profile look like? I know you have an increasing large focus on underserved communities. Is your student the anti-establishment type? Is it the provocative type? Is it the traditionalist who is sort of incentivized by big aim and cause? What does your profile of student look like?
Yeah, it's probably all of the above. So we have students who have joined us from very challenging backgrounds. We have students who have joined us from Harrow School. So that's, and everyone in between. On almost every dimension, it's extraordinarily diverse. So what you'd expect in London is kind of ethnic diversity. We have also socioeconomic diversity, which is quite a challenge for universities, particularly Russell Group universities. We're not a Russell Group university, of course, but we have students who, most of whom could go to Russell Group if that's what they wanted to do. They did apply and they sometimes dropped out of them to come to us. I think the thing that unites the students in a way is they are absolutely, not satisfied to go and study one subject for 3 years. That doesn't cut it for them. The second thing is that they care about something that's bigger than themselves. So to your point, it's not so much anti-establishment. They do care about big problems. I mean, some of them want to go and work in very establishment institutions, but they want to do it sort of for some, not to get the badge. They want to do something. They want to kind of have an impact, which sounds cheesy, but that, we're genuinely trying to help them do that. And the third thing that unites them actually at this early stage is that it's not even that they're not risk averse, they're almost risk hungry. They love the fact that this is a new institution, that it's a bumpy road, that there's, a lot of uncertainty about how big we'll be, about how successful we'll be, about where we'll be in 50 years, 100 years, maybe even 5 years. But they really like that. That's part of their identity, is that they want to be different and make it and take a stand against the normal.
Oh God, I could ask so many questions. One more, and then we're gonna finish with two big chunky op-ed pieces by Ed Fidoe. What I wanted to ask was the ambition then for this. Is it a challenge to the sort of lecture type teaching at my university, Durham? Is the aim to produce a cohort of children who change impact for the better? What are the sort of ambitions of this project?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's about what our students are going to do as graduates in their own lives. And I quite unashamedly believe that university can and should be for something. I don't think we should sort of be all queasy about that and say, well, we'll just provide a neutral education and we don't care what the students do afterwards. I actually do care. If none of them go on to try and tackle these complex problems at any point in their lives, I think we've actually failed. But we're sort of selecting for that. It's not like we're trying to brainwash them when they're with us. We're selecting for that somewhat. So I want them to go off and do amazing things. That's one way in which we'll have impact. And the second big thing, I think, which we achieved at School 21 somewhat, is to have people copy us. And that's really important for us. We do admissions very differently. The degree is very different. We have a very different kind of relationship with outside organizations. We put problems at the center of what we do. If we start to see the system in different ways copying that, I think that will be a good thing. And so, yeah, there's a couple of different ways. With education, it's a long game. And right now we're sort of, we look at retention. We're retaining students from one year to the next. We're doing very well on that as it happens. But, it's very hard to measure the impact of education, as you know.
Certainly is. Well, for final question then, I mean, you hold, I think, the holy trinity of the only person I've spoken to who has started a school, a charity, and a university. I think there should be a sort of placard for you. And no doubt,
or blue Peter badge or something.
No doubt, there's a position even higher up for you. So I'm going to finish with a question about change and challenge ahead of us. If you were the education secretary right now, what one change would you make to the current system?
Now, I think not to throw this back at you, Walter, but to say what one change would you make to the system is quite a difficult, because it is a system and it is complex. It's quite hard to just make one change. Let me tell you the single biggest bugbear I have, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is. My single biggest bugbear, which is not my unique observation, is that it is the education system is a giant sorting and ranking system rather than a machinery for helping the next generation understand how to make everyone's lives better, or to kind of take society to the next stage. And that is what education should be. I don't think that's that controversial, but I do think we're failing at that. I think we're succeeding in a sort of flawed way, but somewhat succeeding at creating this kind of ranking and sorting exercise. And you sort of see that in kind of people's panic when COVID, when they couldn't sit exams. People were like, well, if they can't sit exams and be graded, what was the point of all of this? Because and then you sort of you can see nakedly that this is a sorting exercise rather than a really an education exercise. We need to make sure that the next generation are more thinking more intelligently and urgently about these problems we face. So I would say I would charge some clever people in the Department of Education with the task of trying to shift the levers of kind of influence in that direction and come up with clever policies for that, to move us away from sorting and ranking and towards solving these complex problems. That's what I would try and do.
Well, for those who are listening and not watching, Ed is wearing a very smart dark brown shirt. He's not wearing a cape, but his work is heroic. And I think we can all say that we look forward to seeing what happens next. Ed, thank you for coming on Heads and Tails.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Walter. It's fun.